Hello dears, how are you? I hope that you are doing well. Today's lecture about corporate governance and agency. This is lecture 1 in your course. Let us take about let us have an overview about corporate governance. So, what do we know about corporate governance, or what's the definition of corporate governance? Corporate governance maybe refers to the rules, processes, and laws by which companies are operated, controlled, and regulated. So it defines the rights and responsibilities of the corporate participants, such as the shareholders, board of directors, officers and managers, and other stakeholders, as well as the rules and procedures for making corporate decisions. It's also defined as a structure which intended to benefit all corporate stakeholders by ensuring that the firm is run in a lawful and ethical fashion, so in accordance with the best practices and subjects to all corporate regulations. What do we mean by this paragraph, or what does this paragraph mean? This means that any rules, any processes, any procedures, any laws, this will refer to something called corporate governance. So, when a participants such as shareholders, BODs, officers, managers, stakeholders, this means that those members can operate or can deal with something called corporate governance, which about the rules, processes, and laws. Here, the firm's corporate governance is influenced by both internal factors, such as the shareholders, BODs, and officers, as well as external factors such as clients, creditors, suppliers, competitors, and so on. So here we have two main types of factors, internal factors and external factors. Else, we have also individuals and institutional investors. What do we mean about individuals and institutional investors? To better understand the role that the shareholders play in shaping a firm's corporate governance, it's helpful to differentiate between the two broad classes of owners. Actually, we have two broad classes of owners, which are the individuals and the institutions. So, what about the individual investors? What do we know about investors? What these investors are? The individual investors own small quantities of shares. As a result, they do not have the sufficient means to directly influence a firm's corporate governance. This means that the rules, processes, and laws that can be found in any corporation, those individual investors cannot or have not the right to make any direct influence of a firm corporate governance. So in order to influence the firm, those individual investors often find it necessary to act as a group by voting on corporate matters. So here, the individual investors have not the right to influence the corporate governance unless or they must have to make a group by voting on the corporate matters if they want, sure. So the most important corporate matter, individual investors vote on the selection or sorry on the election of the firm's board of directors. This is the right. If they want to vote for the BOD of the firm, they can make a group and then vote to the corporate matters. So the corporate board's first responsibility is to the shareholders. Then the board not only sets the policies, but also monitor the managerial decision making on behalf of investors. According to that, the institutional investors have advantages over the individual ones as it comes to influencing the corporate governance of a firm. When it comes to the influencing of the corporate governance of the firm, the institutional investors have the right. So the individual investors cannot influence directly the corporate governance matters, but the institutional investors can do so. So the institutional investors are investment professionals that are paid to manage and hold large quantities of securities on behalf of individuals, businesses, and governments. So the institutional investors include banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, and pension funds, and so on. So here the examples of institutional investors: banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, and pension funds. And the difference between institutional investors and individual investors have not the right to influence the corporate matters, but the institutional investors have the right to do so. So here the institutional investors often monitor and directly influence the firm's corporate governance by exerting pressure on management to perform or communicating their concerns to the firm's board. These large investors can also threaten to exercise their voting rights or liquidate their holdings if the board does not respond positively to their concerns. So here we have a matter. What is the matter? The matter is when the board of directors does not respond positively to the concerns of the institutional investors. This will arise a problem here because the larger investors can threaten the exercise through their voting about the right. What about the government regulation, or what do we mean about government regulation? Unlike the impact that the client's creditor, suppliers, or competitors can have on a particular firm's corporate governance, the government regulation generally shapes the corporate governance of all firms. So if I want to shape the corporate governance of my firm, I need the government regulation. So during the past, corporate governance has received increased attention due to the several high-profile corporate scandals. High profile corporate scandals, so it's involving the abuse of corporate power, and in some cases it's alleged criminal activity by corporate officers. So here, when I want to make a government regulation, or when I want to shape the corporate governance of the firm, I need to use the government regulation, and this is what we have from the past. Okay, so there are two misdeeds that derive from two main types. First, the false disclosures in financial reporting and other material information releases, and the undisclosed conflicts of interest between corporations and their analysts, auditors, and attorneys between corporates. This means that we have something called disclosure. This disclosure is for the financial reporting of financial statements that the firm have to disclose after its financial period. So it may be a false disclosures to make something like that, leading to some mistakes or to some misdeeds to the investors, which make an impact of investors that this company have a great profit, but it's not in reality, or actually it's not. So the false disclosures in financial reporting means that this firm or this corporation have not the high profit, or have not the earnings per share, the higher earnings per share in reality, but the firm manager released the false disclosures in financial reporting to the investors in order to achieve, in order to have a lot of investors in the future. So here, what do we mean by false disclosure? So what about the undisclosed conflicts? This means that there are a lot of conflicts of interest between corporations and their analysts. So we have managers. Those managers achieve their own wealth, want to increase their own wealth. Also, we have analysis, auditors, attorneys, all of them want to increase their wealth. So there are a conflict of interest between all of them, or among all of them. So here we have something called Sarbanes-Oxley. This Sarbanes-Oxley is about an integral part of an effective corporate governance for civil or criminal individuals who conduct unethical or illegal acts. So here, if I have unethical or illegal acts, this means that there are Sarbanes-Oxley issue. So here, the Sarbanes-Oxley, the objective is of the Sarbanes-Oxley is to eliminate many of the disclosure and conflict of interest problems. So I need the Sarbanes-Oxley to release or to eliminate all problems of conflicts of interest among managers, assets, attorneys, and so on. So the Sarbanes-Oxley accomplished the following, or what are the duties of Sarbanes-Oxley? Number one is to establish the oversight board to monitor the accounting industry. Number two is to tighten the audit regulations. Number three is also to tighten the penalties against executives. After that, we have to strengthen the accounting disclosure, and then to establish the corporate board structure and the membership guidelines. So this is the accomplishments of SOX. What about the agency problem? Okay, we have talked about the corporate governance problem and the individuals of corporate governance, the individual investors and institutional ones. Also, we have a lot of issues regarding to the corporate governance. So what about the agency issue? Or what do we mean by agency, not corporate? Corporate governance refers to the rules and policies, procedures, and so on that can found in any corporation. But what about the agency issue? The agency issue about the duty of the financial managers. And the duty of the financial managers is to maximize the wills of firms' owners. Shareholders give managers decision-making authority over the firm. So here we have a financial managers. The duty of the financial manager is to maximize the wills of the firm, the wealth of the firm. And the shareholders will give those managers the decision authority because the shareholders trust those managers in maximizing the wealth of the firm. But actually, those managers needs to maximize their own wealth, not the wealth of the firm's owners. So this is me have a problem. This is me arise a problem that called the agency problem. So in theoretical, the most managers would agree with the goal of shareholders' wealth maximization, but in reality or actually, managers are also concerned with their own personal wealth, job, job security, and their benefits. So the agency problem arises. How this agency problem arises? When the corporate governance is to ensure the accountability of managers in an organization through mechanisms that try to reduce or eliminate the principal agent problem. This means that we have an agency problem. Why? Because when these mechanisms fail, agency problem arise. When these mechanisms fail, agency problems arise. So the agency problems arise when managers want to achieve their own goal or want to maximize their own wealth and ignore the firm's wealth and the shareholders' wealth maximization. So the agency problem arises when there is a conflict of interest between the two parties. So when we have an agency problem, this will arise the agency cost. So what about the agency costs? The agency costs also are costs that happen by shareholders due to the presence or avoidance of agency problems. And in either case, it represents a loss of shareholders' wealth. So according to the agency problem, the agency costs will arise. So what about the shareholders cost or the shareholders agency cost? Shareholders agency cost happen when managers fail to make the best investment decision, or when the managers have to be monitored to ensure that the best investment decision is made. This because either situation is likely to result in a lower stock price. So here, if we have a conflict between managers and shareholders, this may lead to the agency cost or the agency problem that happened because of the conflicts of interest between both managers and shareholders. What else? We have something called management compensation plans. Something called management compensation plans. There are two key types of managerial compensation. We have two types, incentive plans and performance plans. Then we have to know the difference between incentive and performance. What about incentive plans? Incentive plans tie the management compensation to the share price. So if it's a relationship between management and share price, this means that we have incentive plans. But if we have a relationship between management compensation and EPS or earnings per share, this means we have the performance plans. So what else about the incentive plans? One incentive plan grants stock options management also grants. So if the firm's stock prices rise over time, the managers will be rewarded by being able to purchase the stock at the market price in an effective time. So here the time of resale of shares will get the higher market price for these shares. So when there is a firm stock price rises, this means that the managers will be rewarded. And this is about the incentive plans of management compensation plans. So what about the performance plans? We also said the difference that the incentive plans tie the management to the share price, but the performance plans tie the management to the EPS, which is earnings per share. So compensation under these plans is often in the form of performance shares or cash bonus. Here we have another definition or another terminology called the threat of takeover. What do you mean by the threat of takeover? This happened when a firm's internal governance structures is unable to keep agency problems. This means that we have a lot of agency problems that leads to agency costs, and our firms is unable to keep these problems or unable to solve these problems. So this means that the managers will try to gain control of the firm. And because of agency problems, this will represent a misuse of firms' resources and impose agency costs on the firm's shareholders. So the firm's stock is generally depressed, making the firm an attractive takeover target. So if we have another company or another firm, it will see this company or will know about this company, that this company is in a weak position or a depressed position, and it will be an attractive takeover target for the other firm. So here the threat of takeover by another firm that believes it can enhance a troubled firm's value by restructuring its management. So the another firm has the hope to restructure the management of the old firm or of the weakest firm. That makes the financing will be a strong source of external corporate governance. So here we have another firm that see the oldest firm in a weak position or in attractive takeover position. So this is all for lecture 1. I hope that you understand it very well, and if you have questions, feel free to ask on the e-learning sites and messages. So all the best, see you and goodbye.